I, 32 male, just found out my coworker, 21 female, is my long-lost niece. I don't even know how to bring it up. So basically, my older brother, who would be 40 male but he overdosed 4 years ago, starting from when he was a teenager, made all kinds of bad decisions. Tons of debt, failing out of school, legal trouble with DUIs and drugs, several failed attempts at rehab, being involved with questionable people, etc. At one point, when he was still living with us, we had this strange woman repeatedly showing up drunk at our house with a baby/toddler. I couldn't really tell as I was a kid myself, but I think the baby was not a newborn, but not walking or talking yet either. She claimed the child was my brother's and was demanding money. This woman looked older than my brother. She was also drunk and aggressive and didn't seem right in the head. And my mum, 58 female at the time, just basically saw this woman as a threat and either threatened or just called the cops every time she showed up. Eventually, she stopped showing up. No idea what happened to her. Since then, my mom has expressed that she feels bad about that, says she wonders about the baby girl on the off chance she was actually my brother's, as the baby had red hair and so did my brother and me, and wishes she had reacted more rationally. Especially since my brother died, she's been bringing this up more often and saying that she has dreams about that baby sometimes. I know my mum struggled a lot with guilt since my brother died, since she tried to help him so many times and couldn't really save him from throwing his life away. So I submitted my DNA to a website. My mum doesn't know, and I didn't want to tell her and get her hopes up. Well, I found out that one of the closest matches, other than the people I already know that I'm related to, is my coworker. Her name is really unusual, so it's most definitely her and not someone else with her name. We have been working together for about 2 years, and I've been her supervisor for most of that time. We work well together, but we aren't close. I don't think she's ever told me anything about her family except her cats, so I don't even know how to bring this up. I don't know how to even look her in the eye the next time that we have a shift together. We have different shifts tomorrow, thank God. If the DNA test brought up a stranger, I had a perfect plan for what to write to them, but I had no plan at all for if it was someone I knew. Should I call her? Talk about it at work? I don't know when she's going to see my name as a match. I don't know how to ask her, hey, is your mum that crazy drunk foreign lady who used to try to get child support from my brother? I don't know how to ask her to come meet my mother and bring her closure. And I'm afraid now that she'll want something from me or my family, like unpaid child support. It's deserved, but I can't exactly afford it. My mum isn't rich either after paying a bunch of legal fees for my brother, or that she'll want a family relationship with me when I don't know how to suddenly switch gears in my head and become someone's uncle instead of a supervisor. I know those things would be an issue no matter who my niece was, but it seems different when my work life comes into it and when it's someone I already know. I mean, I figure if she's looking for her birth family, she probably wants a relationship. I knew my mum would want a relationship, so that wasn't a problem for me until I knew that I'd see this person every day. Any advice about how to raise this issue, please? And now in the comments, I think with DNA websites, they have to have samples from both parties to compare it, which means she probably got an email or alert of some kind about the DNA samples matching. But I wouldn't assume anything. Maybe just ask her if she's ever tried it, and if she says yes, elaborate and ask which one, and explain that you used the same one. OP says, oh yeah, I'm sure she submitted her own DNA to the website. I would feel awkward about bringing it up in a roundabout way like that, especially since she and I don't really talk about non-work related things ever. So even if she hadn't seen the results yet, she would know something was up. I think that would be more awkward than just asking her directly. The confirmation would still be a good idea. If nothing else, it lets her know that you are the person who the site connected her to. It also acts as an opener. Once she confirms it, you might just next lead with, I think we should go get coffee later. It seems like we have a lot to talk about. I would suggest being prepared to try to be diplomatic regarding both your brother and her mother. You won't want to lie to her, but you may want to be careful about how blunt you are about what you saw of their problems. At the same time, such info on tendencies towards addiction could be good info for her to have. And OP says to that, you are probably right. Talking it out over coffee or something is probably better than trying to do it at work or on the phone. Do you have any idea for how to begin a conversation like that? My mind is doing a total blank. It sounds simple, but I can't even think. And yeah, good call about being diplomatic too. I've been around my brother's crazy for so long, my tendency is to be a bit flippant about it. Maybe it's a coping mechanism, or maybe I am just out of sympathy for him after everything he put my mum and me through. But it might be a sensitive subject for her. I'd probably suggest starting off by asking her about what her life has been like. One big thing will be to try to gauge what her relationship with her mother is like. There's a pretty good chance that her mother has told your niece that she tried repeatedly to approach your family, your mum, for support and was refused. That's accurate, frankly, but you'll need to explain the context of it from your family's perspective. You'll probably want to avoid mentioning that her mum seemed off, but much more focus on that the brother was heavily around a bad crowd. And so, as a result of all the crazy experiences that resulted from that, you all did not trust the story of anyone around him. She will probably have loads of questions about your brother and your family, so you can ask her if she has such questions. But she probably will be ready with a lot of questions, such that you won't really have to guide the conversation much yourself. Hey, fun fact. The other day, I read that only 1% of the human population has red hair because it's recessive. You have red hair and I have red hair. What are the chances of two people in the same room having red hair and aren't related? 1 in 10,000, that's what. You remind me of my dead brother. Or not. And back to the post, mini update. I ended up asking her directly via text. It's definitely her that I matched with, which I don't doubt at all. Her name is very unique. Anything beyond that is unconfirmed. We're going to get coffee after work tomorrow and talk. And now, on to the update. Thanks everyone for your advice about how to talk to my niece. It helped sort my thoughts out and consider things I hadn't thought of. Even the people who were harsh, it made me realize what my mum and I might look like from her point of view. I texted my coworker about the DNA match, and she agreed to meet with me after work the next day. It was an uncomfortable conversation and a very uncomfortable workday, but it wasn't horrible. Here is the gist of what I found out. We are pretty sure that we are uncle and niece. We don't know for sure if she's the same baby who that woman brought to our house all those years ago, but it seems likely. The timing lines up. But the only way to know for sure would be for my niece to ask her mother, which she doesn't want to do. She has known for most of her life that her mother's boyfriend who raised her was probably not her biological father, but it was confirmed with a DNA test several years ago. She still calls him her dad. It made the conversation confusing a few times. She never wanted to meet her biological father. She did the test more out of curiosity about her ethnicity and for medical reasons. She did have a rough childhood, but she says she and her family are in a better situation now. At the time, that was all she told me, and then she changed the subject. She's thinking about meeting my mother and having a relationship, but she needs some time to decide. She said that if she decides against contact, she would still be okay with me telling my mum about her so my mum can have some closure, just so long as I don't give my mum her contact info without permission, which of course I'd never do. I haven't told my mum about finding her yet, and I won't until she makes a decision. And I brought up the issue about our work situation. Now if I recommend her for a promotion, it's suddenly nepotism, even if I would have done that anyway. The company might transfer one of us to another department or location if they find out. She said that she didn't want to lie, and wouldn't mind being transferred and might even prefer another location. I dealt with the HR disclosure. They're talking to the both of us separately and reviewing policy to come up with a fair solution. I typed most of that yesterday evening. After our initial conversation, my niece and I spent the next 2 days at work basically pretending like nothing happened. But then, as I was typing the update post, I got a text from her asking if I could meet up and talk again, and I figured I'd wait for that to post an update. So this morning, we met up for coffee again, and my niece asked some more questions. Some things about my brother's medical history, then just a little bit about what he was like, what my mum's like, what our extended family is like, etc. I was honest about my brother's issues, but I tried to be sensitive and tone down the attitude that I usually have about him. It actually made me really emotional. I mean, crap. My brother was a train wreck for most of my life. But once upon a time, he had been someone that I looked up to who played catch with me and helped me with homework. I loved him. I just didn't love the person that he became. Anyway, by then, I felt like the ice was broken and the conversation was more personal. So I asked my niece again what her life had been like. Long story short, it turns out her mum was once a prostitute. That's why she wasn't interested in meeting her biological father, and why she hadn't thought her mum even knew who her father was. She told me about how she spent the earliest years of her life in extreme poverty, having to shoplift necessities, until her mum and her mum's boyfriend managed to find stable jobs. It made me feel like a complete monster. My whole life, I'd thought of my niece's mother, assuming it's the same woman who showed up at our house back then, as some horrible older woman who helped drag my teenage brother deeper into a wretched lifestyle. But it turned out she was just selling sex to survive. She didn't lure him in. She didn't want him. He went looking for her. That flipped a switch in my head for some reason. I don't know. To clarify, I was like 10 to 11 years old when the woman was showing up, so even if I had known better, it's not like I could have made a difference either way. But it still hit me hard to think about how I'd been judging her and trying to justify my mum's denying the baby because I thought it was necessary to protect my brother back when it seemed like there could still have been hope for him. I was really shocked with some of the details of what my niece told me. When I found out it was my coworker, of course I freaked out about how to actually handle the situation, but I guess in some ways I felt relieved? Absolved? Because she seemed like she turned out okay. She's employed, in college, hard-working, and is super responsible. I wouldn't have guessed that she'd had a rough childhood from what I knew of her. Finding out the full details, there was more to it than what I typed here, made me feel like a monster. She cried, I nearly cried, and we hugged awkwardly. She's still undecided if she wants any contact with my mom, but she says she's glad that we had this conversation. She says there aren't many people she can talk about her past with. I'm glad we talked too. There were a lot of feelings about my brother that I've pretty much been suppressing. It's probably been good for me to actually have to process them, even if it hurt. I'm also glad I got to help her in some way by being a listening ear, and I'm glad that I got to know her a bit, even if she ends up deciding she doesn't want a relationship with my side of the family, or ends up transferring and we don't see each other at all anymore. Thanks again everyone here for all the advice. I was able to go into the conversation a lot more prepared than I would have been otherwise. And now in the comments, take it step by step. Maybe you both can develop a close friendship, but time will only tell. I hope she's slowly willing to let you into her life. And OP says, yeah, I'm just gonna respect her space and see when she reaches out again. I told her if she feels the need to talk again, that I will be there. And she said she would let me know. Thanks for the update. Your niece sounds like a very resilient woman. And OP replies, yeah, I'm honestly amazed. Before I knew she was my niece, I never would have thought that she'd had anything that horrible in her past at all. I thought that she was naive, if anything. There was this one time when she was new to the job when I saw her giving money to a homeless guy who wasn't allowed at our business because he had harassed guests and employees before. I told the guy to leave, and she was angry about it. I explained why I yelled at him, and she seemed to understand, but after that, I thought she was just extremely sheltered and didn't realize how unpredictable or dangerous some homeless people could be. And today I find out it's probably the opposite. She knows probably better than anyone, but she just has a lot of empathy. It just made me rethink a lot of things. So happy to see an update and keep us posted. Please consider therapy for yourself. This is a lot to deal with, and you have handled it so well. And OP says, thanks. Yeah, it might be helpful. I saw a grief counselor when my brother died, but only for a few sessions. Maybe she can help with this kind of thing too, or refer me to someone else. And now, on to this second update. My niece agreed to meet my mum. What are some things that I should keep in mind? Thanks to everyone who left advice or kind words on my previous posts. A few people asked for more updates, and I thought it definitely wouldn't be a bad idea to get more advice about how to actually handle the meeting between my niece and mum. So, my niece decided that she is willing to meet my mum. She gave me a letter to pass on to her. ask me to tell her how my mum reacted and help set up a time and a place. I already gave it to my mum after I read it with my niece's permission, so I can't share the exact words, but here's the gist of it. First, she introduced herself by name, age, what she's learning in college, and the family that she grew up with, basic stuff. And then she went on to explain some things that we had already spoken about in person, basically about how she had an extremely difficult life in her early childhood, that she always knew her father wasn't really her father, but hadn't thought her biological father even had any idea she existed, let alone that his family would know that she had existed. She wrote that when she found out that we had known about her and refused to help, she was angry. She said she understood why we wouldn't want to give her mother any money, but there were other things that we could have given. She wrote about some of the things that she had been through and how it could have been avoided if we had helped her even a little. To be honest, that part was pretty hard to read. My niece even said as I was reading it, "Don't worry, I know it wasn't your fault. You were just a kid." And it looked like she might be afraid of how I would react. I told her I didn't blame her at all for being mad at my mum, and I wouldn't blame her for being mad at me either. She just nodded and didn't look me in the eye. After that part, she had written something really nice, that she knew me and I was a good man, so she knows my mother must have been a good mother, and that she was sorry to hear that my brother/her father had died, and that she knows how it feels when someone you love keeps making the wrong choices over and over, and that my mother shouldn't blame herself for that. In the rest of the letter, she wrote some religious things. I'm not really religious, but I respect it. My mum kinda pretends to be religious, but doesn't ever actually go to church. She said she had been praying for the strength to forgive my mum, and she believed God wouldn't have let her go through those things in her childhood if there wasn't a reason. And that there also must be a reason why I found her now, and that if my mum was willing, she was ready to meet face to face. I told my mum about finding her yesterday. She was shocked, asked tons of questions, including a bunch that I didn't know the answers to, and finally, I gave her the letter and a picture my niece had given me to pass on. My mum was so excited she burst into tears and kept saying, "She looks exactly like my brother," and pointed out every single feature of hers and how it apparently looked just like him or like my dad, who was also deceased. To be honest, I don't really think it was that obvious of a resemblance, but that's not important. Then she read the letter, and she was inconsolable. She full-on sobbed for about 2 hours. It was about as bad as my brother's funeral. Even after she calmed down, she would burst into tears every once in a while for the rest of the day. But eventually, she mellowed out enough to think of a few different dates, times, and places to meet up. I texted these to my niece, and she said she'd look over her schedule and get back to me. So I guess what I want to ask is, since I'm kinda playing diplomat here, can anyone think of things that I should keep in mind? Of course, my niece's preferences are going to take priority over suggestions, but some issues I've been particularly wondering about are, should we meet in public, as it's neutral territory, or invite my niece over to our house so we don't have to worry about other people being around and making things awkward? Part of the reason that first conversation with my niece over coffee was so uncomfortable was because there were so many other people around, I think. My mum keeps saying that we need to invite my niece to my cousin's wedding in February and introduce her to the rest of the family. I think that's a terrible idea. Way too soon, and way too many people at once. But my mum says that if we don't at least ask, it's like we don't consider her a part of the family. I think if we ask, we are putting her in a position of having to say no and worry about being rude. But my mum will not let it drop. For the rest of the post, I'm asking for open-ended advice, but on this particular issue, I'm mostly asking for people to tell me that I'm right, and for ideas of things I can say to get my mum to drop it. Should I start acting more friendly to my niece at work? Obviously, I'm not going to be like, "Hey niece, it's me, your favorite uncle," and draw a bunch of attention to it, but now it's like, when we're at work, we act like nothing happened, and it's weird. Should I at least smile and chat with her more? Might not be a problem for much longer, since my niece is probably transferring to a different location. And, in general, anything else I should keep in mind for the meeting with my niece and my mum? Things I should talk with or ask either of them about beforehand? Thanks again for all the advice so far. And now in the comments, As for the wedding, I'd say not to bring it up in this meeting. If she is insistent on asking, maybe wait for a few days and text her that your mom wants to include her, but make sure she knows it's completely fine to say no. This way, she doesn't have to make a decision on the spot. And OP says, thanks. Me asking later is probably the best compromise. I would say be honest with niece and warn her about your mum's thinking. Give her an opportunity to prepare. There's a snarky part of me that is glad your mother feels bad because your niece went through a lot, but whatever. I think the priority of the meeting should be your niece's comfort, which means that she should feel secure and she should feel like she's in control. I know this meeting will be emotional for your mother, but your niece is the priority. A neutral area is definitely better, but it should be at a place that your niece can feel secure and has the ability to leave at a moment's notice if it gets too much or something goes wrong. Make sure your niece has an exit plan, and also maybe come up with a signal that she could subtly make if she wants you to change the subject. Ask your niece if she has a preference for where the meeting should be, and ask her if there are any things that she doesn't want discussed so you could prep your mother beforehand. You are going to need to rehearse with your mother because she is the biggest liability. It could be that if she starts sobbing about how your niece looks like your brother, and your brother was really an awesome guy, it will upset your niece. You also don't want your mother to justify or try to defend any of her past choices, because since your niece was hurt from them, it will seem like your mother is minimizing the pain that she went through from her childhood. With regards to work, keep it as it always is, or act as if she's a cousin or something. You could smile and nod, but you are not enthusiastically hugging them and making a scene every time you see them. Good luck. And OP replies, thanks. This is all good advice. I'll talk to niece about a signal or things that she doesn't want to bring up. I don't think my mum will try to defend herself, since she feels really bad about it, but it's possible she'll try to do the cry and make it about her thing. I'll talk about that. If she really feels guilty, there's a really good chance she's going to want absolution in order to stop feeling guilty, which means she's going to try to justify her actions in order to get your niece to forgive her so she could stop feeling guilty. Don't let that happen. It minimizes your niece's suffering, and it will probably make her mad. And now back up to the post, there is an update. Thanks for all the advice. We're going to meet at my mum's place next Sunday, my niece's choice, as we couldn't really find any restaurants with private areas, and our local library has kinda weird hours that we couldn't make work. I also just straight up asked her how she felt about being friendly at work, because it's awkward to basically pretend like nothing happened, and she said she felt awkward about it too, but was acting that way because she thought that's what I would want. I talked to my mum about all the things that you've all mentioned. And now for update 3. Introducing my long-lost niece to my mum did not go very well. So, it was a disaster. There is so much I should have done but didn't think to do at the time, and I just feel like I messed up big time. I don't know what to do about it. I tried to keep in mind all the suggestions I got, like before the meeting, I asked my niece where she wanted to meet, if she wanted to bring anyone with her, if there was anything I should tell my mum not to talk and ask about, and she just said, I'm sure I can handle it, and couldn't think of anything. But she did agree that if she wanted help getting my mum to back off, that she would look at me and blink 3 times. I talked to my mum first too, and basically just tried to warn her don't come on too strong, be sensitive, don't try to defend her actions. She agreed not to do any of those things, but So my niece shows up at my mum's place, which was my niece's choice, and right away my mum is all over her, hugging and touching her hair and crying. My niece didn't seem to be enjoying that very much, but she tolerated it. I would have intervened, but she didn't signal me by blinking, and it didn't last very long. So I thought, okay, I'll do something about it if it happens again, but let it drop. My mum asked my niece a bunch of questions, and the whole vibe was honestly uncomfortable. Maybe she felt like she was being interrogated. They weren't ill-intended questions, but they were personal. Things like, what does her name mean? What neighborhood does she live in? Does she have a boyfriend? What's she going to do after college, etc. My niece was kind of stiff and just answered the questions, but not warmly. In hindsight, I probably should have intervened, but I didn't think much of it. She didn't use the signal, and she was kind of the same way, stiff and impersonal when she and I first talked about being related. but then the next time we talked, she warmed up. So I thought maybe she just needed to warm up. The real disaster happened when my mum brought up my niece's childhood and went and did exactly what she said she wouldn't do, and worse. I didn't really do my part either, and I'm kicking myself, but it escalated so fast. I'm gonna remember what was said as best as possible. I can't think of an easy way to sum this up, it just escalated so fast. So Mum says, "I'm so sorry that we didn't take you in when you were a baby. I didn't know. Niece, I forgive you. I believe you have to understand from my perspective. I was just trying to protect my baby. Your father, me, hey, Mum, niece, he wasn't a baby. I was a baby. I was an actual baby." And my mum replies, "He was my baby. You'll understand that when you have kids. And from my perspective, there was this strange ethnicity woman." Niece replies, "What does being ethnicity have to do with it?" Mum replies, "Nothing. It wasn't because she was ethnicity. This woman was shouting. She was acting like she was on something. My kid answered the door," points to me, "and I didn't know what she might have done to my name," or niece cuts her off and says, "She wouldn't have done anything to him. You think she'd hurt kids just because she's ethnicity?" Mum says, "I wasn't saying that. I was saying, yes you were. I was saying I didn't know this woman. She could have been anyone. I didn't know if you were even really brother's name's child." Niece replies, "Do you think if my mum was going to lie about a person being my father, she would have picked someone who lived here?" Gestures around my mum's place, which is not very classy. I'm like, "Hey!" And my mum says, "Well, I didn't know. I asked brother's name, and he said he didn't know that woman, and he had no idea." Niece says, "Right, because men never lie." Hey! Well, all I'm saying is, if she had gone through the proper courts and she was an undocumented prostitute, of course she didn't. She then grabbed her shoes and sprinted out of my mum's place. I ran after her to make sure she was okay. She said to leave her alone. I asked if I could at least give her a ride, and she screamed, "Go away." So I did. And I was worried because this neighborhood isn't the safest place to walk, so I texted my niece and apologized again and said it's okay if she doesn't want to talk, but please text me when she gets home so I know she's okay. Maybe I shouldn't have done that, I don't know, but I was worried. She did text me back later and said she was okay. She also apologized for losing her cool, but said she was going to call out of work for a few days and don't contact her until she comes back. So my question is, now what? I'm still at my mum's place and I want to yell at her, but she's already sobbing. I feel horrible and I don't know how to fix this. I didn't foresee my mum saying those things about my niece's mum's ethnicity, and I should have intervened, but I kind of panicked and I couldn't think of what to say. My mum is a kind person, but not always tactful. I really appreciate any advice. I don't really have anyone to talk to about this. Most of my friends are from work, and I can't talk to them about it for obvious reasons. And now in the comments, your mum sounds racist and tone-deaf. She wanted to excuse her cruelty and be released of all fault rather than care about someone else's feelings. She committed an act of opportunity where it should have been a place of healing. Did she only want to meet niece to absolve her of guilt, or to let it be known that she is indeed not an awful person, and not because she wanted to reconnect with family? She violated so many boundaries from step 1 and made no apologies for it. An apology followed by an excuse is no apology at all, it's an excuse. And OP replies, "This is a good way to put it. And I'll try to talk to her about it and explain it to her this way. Though I don't know if it'll do any good in helping her realize what she did wrong. It's really upsetting for me to think about, because I really thought she did care about my niece and wanted to connect with her. But yeah, it just seemed like she was being selfish and trying to make excuses to prove that she is not an awful person. The best you can do now is to leave her and respect whatever decision she makes." OP replies, "Yeah, you didn't take any of our advice. Honestly, she might be better off without you all." OP replies, "I tried to, but in the moment, my head couldn't keep up with the conversation and figure out what happened." And now on to the final update. Here's the gist of what happened since that awful disaster of a reunion. I talked to my mum about what went wrong with the things that she said to my niece. I basically told her that her apologies weren't really apologies, and she was just trying to defend herself and not apologize. At first, my mum was argumentative with me about it, but eventually she admitted that I was right, and she didn't handle it well. She found this book about how to apologize to people, and she said it helped. My mum says she doesn't know why she brought up my niece's mother's ethnicity. She said it just slipped out. She agreed that she needs to be more sensitive about that kind of thing. I'm concerned that it'll just slip out again. So if anyone has any resources for old white people on how not to be prejudiced, let me know. Especially books. My mum insists that only books are reliable, and anything you read on the internet or see on the TV is lies. She and I work together to write an apology letter to my niece for her to read whenever she wants to, if she wants to. No pressure to respond. She apologized for saying offensive things and for making the reunion about defending herself and not being considerate of my niece's feelings, and then thanked her for the kindness of coming and said she'd like to try again. But she understood if my niece wouldn't want to, and she wished her the best regardless. And my niece was kind enough to give us another chance. We all met up again to try and talk things out one more time, and this time it went much better. My niece vented some things, but also said she understood why my mum did what she did, and then she was like, "You can't change the past. All we can do is move forward." And then they had a nicer conversation about random subjects that my mum brought up. My mum wants to pay for some of my niece's college. She can't really afford much though. My niece didn't want to take the money, but finally agreed and promised to pay it all forward once she reaches her career end goal. Speaking of careers, my niece is actually leaving her current job to work at a more future career relevant job starting later this spring. I'll miss seeing her around at work, but I'm happy for her. And for as long as she's in the area, she and I are going to get together every month for lunch and or something fun. Getting to know my niece has made me remember some of the good times with my brother, like when we used to go to the movies together or hang out at the arcade and pizza place or amusement parks. I used to think he was the coolest and most fun person in the world. It brought up grief, not only for my brother, but also knowing my niece and I have a similar age gap, how I might have been that person for her. I'm really sad that I missed out on that, but now we have a chance to make up for lost time. My mum and my niece both like baking and cooking, so they're gonna start occasionally meeting up at my mum's house to do that and exchange recipes. My niece doesn't want to spend holidays with us, come to family get-togethers, or meet anyone else in our family. At least not for now, possibly never. I totally understand and respect this. I really can't thank you all enough for all the support, advice, and kind words. I don't know how this situation would have turned out without all of your help. And now in the comments, thank you for taking the time to update. It's funny how things work out sometimes. Wishing you and your niece the very best. I'm happy that you've all been able to establish a relationship with your niece and have her in your lives. Please stop taking the blame for awkward meetings and uncomfortable conversations. The way you handled all this was very thoughtful and emotionally mature. You handled it all a lot better than some people would have. And OP says, "Thank you so much. I feel better now, but for a while, I felt pretty bad since I set this whole thing up." And a book won't stop someone from being racist. That's up to your mother if she wants to continue being a racist piece of shit or not. And OP says, "I mean, that's true, but I think she wants to learn. The apology book apparently helped." I see you've already had How to Be an Anti-Racist recommended. My other suggestion would be So You Want to Talk About Race by I cannot pronounce that name. That poor girl. I can't imagine how awful it was for her to be sitting there with this total stranger, emoting all over her with, "I did no wrong, but your mother." The niece was incredibly kind to give her a second chance. I hope things work out well for the niece. I was really surprised that things went better the second time around. My opinion of OP's mother was so low. I can't think of anything more awkward to have to deal with in an office environment. OP did well to recognize that his discovery effectively prevented him from maintaining his duty to his employers of impartial management. That could easily have ended up being one of the twists in the tale of this story. Prostitutes don't know where clients live or their full name to go looking for them at home, so I doubt the brother was just a client. And the baby had red hair like the two kids of the woman, so she should have suspected that it was his child, particularly since he was getting in mess after mess. I agree. Since the mother had an inkling that her dead son could have been the father, she should have at least asked for a paternity test. I think she was just in survival mode with an awful teenager, no support, and didn't have the emotional or financial capacity to add to the mess. She thought she was protecting her family. Obviously it was a mistake, but making the choice in the first place makes sense if you put yourself in her shoes. And it was decades ago. It's not like she could look the woman up on Facebook when she realized she messed up. I don't know. I feel really bad for the niece here. It sounds like she's been put through it, and I sort of get the vibe she's still being put through it by this family who never helped her when she needed it most. It feels like a lot of the forgiving and moving on is something the niece has to do. I hope that I'm misinterpreting and that she's getting support and positive interaction from this, but she's also really young and being the most mature one here at times.